Captain Elaine Collins crashes the deadliest wedding in Westeros. She looks like Sansa Stark. She fights like no one they've ever seen. And the Red Wedding just changed forever. Hey everyone, this is TH Stories 80, where we narrate fanfiction audiobooks. Now we begin Chapter 2 of A Towery in Westeros. Let's dive in. Alayne POV, the twins, several minutes earlier. It had taken stealth and a bit of luck for Alayne to steal a hooded cloak from a drunken guard close to the castle after she left the relative safety of the forest nearly 20 minutes earlier. With her dark blue flight suit and black vest helping to camouflage her as the sky grew darker, Alayne managed to hop onto the back of a covered cart being pulled by two horses toward the castle entrance. After landing on the cart, she covered herself with a thick grey woolen blanket that lay over what she assumed were barrels of salted pork. At least, that was what the barrels smelled like. She wrinkled her nose as she settled beneath the blanket. Several minutes later, the cart came to a stop. She heard someone ask what was inside. "Salted pork," the man holding the reins replied gruffly. "For the wedding." "Oh, crashing a medieval wedding," Alayne thought with interest, her eyebrows rising beneath the hood. "This is going to be interesting. So that's why people were enjoying themselves. It's a wedding." She smirked as the cart began to move again. She waited a few more minutes before slipping out. From then on, Alayne had been sneaking around, using the crowd as cover while observing the mass of people celebrating as they ate and drank. It didn't take long for her to figure out that the real wedding had to be taking place inside the castle walls. Those partying outside were clearly the bannermen of the wedding party and their hosts. And Alayne wanted to see it for herself. She had graduated from the academy with a degree in aeronautical engineering, but her passion lay in anthropology and archaeology. Observing a real-life medieval wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. As she moved through the drunken throngs of men, she watched the long wooden tables piled with food and mugs of what she assumed was ale. Women hurried between the tables serving the guests, while others were being groped. Alayne even felt her rear end smacked once or twice, and the offenders simply laughed as she hurried away. As she continued on, she listened to bannermen shouting at one another about how the king in the north would win the war. King in the north, she wondered as she cautiously weaved between the crowds. Is there some kind of war going on, or... Alayne stopped abruptly and slipped into a shadowy section of the hallway she had just entered. The realization hit her like a punch. If there was a war happening, she needed to keep her head down and stay far away from it. It had been drilled into her since joining Stargate Command that the Towery stayed clear of internal affairs and conflicts between governments on alien worlds. The infamous Tegalus incident flashed through her mind. Stargate Command didn't want another scenario like that. The rule had been drilled into every new SGC recruit. So Alayne reminded herself to be extremely careful. I already landed the Sparrow in an isolated area away from any humans, she reassured herself. So there shouldn't be a problem. And this is just an observational mission. I'll head back in another hour after some exploring, and then I'll broadcast the distress signal. As she continued deeper into the castle, she thought, I was supposed to reach the rendezvous point in 5 hours. After that, if I'm not there, they'll send a search party. So I'm guessing I'll be here at most 48 hours. At least that was what she hoped. Entering another hallway, Alayne heard distant music and shouts of celebration. Then came the excited cry that it was time for the wedding ceremony. I read about this, Alayne thought as she crept toward a set of wide-open wooden doors. Both doors were decorated with 7-pointed stars. Revelers rushed out, pushing along a nearly naked man and a blushing woman who was dressed only in her undergarments. The hooded redhead slipped into the room the group had exited and gaped at its size and extravagance. Moving along the wall at the rear, she marveled at the great stone hall and the torches hanging on the walls. She looked up to the chandeliers, their candles illuminating the entire room. She caught the scent of cooked meat and glanced over the tables as she crept into a corner, scanning the area and taking in the sights and sounds. Then Alayne felt it, that unsettling sense of being watched. She froze beneath the light of a nearby torch, her eyes shifting toward the source of the instinctive warning. It made no sense. She was surrounded by several hundred people celebrating the wedding feast. So, how can I be recognized? As far as I know, there are no other SG teams here, or I'd have detected their subcutaneous transmitters. And wait, how? Her thoughts abruptly derailed as her gaze locked with a pair of eyes across the room. Another redhead, staring straight at her. Elaine's eyes widened. No! The noise of celebration seemed to fade into nothing. She stared at the older redhead, disbelief flooding through her. It can't be. Her throat tightened as she silently mouthed a single word. Mom? And in an instant, her memories flashed back to what happened 3 years earlier. Heathrow, London, 3 years ago. It had been a long, dull flight from Colorado Springs to London by way of Chicago's O'Hare Airport. Alayne breathed a deep sigh of relief as she finally stepped off the plane, her black carry-on slung over her shoulder. She moved through the terminal toward the luggage carousels and collected her 2 medium-sized, hard-shelled suitcases. With her bags in hand, she strode through one of the exits into the arrival hall and flagged a taxi. Once inside, she settled into the rear seat with her carry-on beside her and gave the driver her destination. He nodded, started the meter, and pulled away toward the city where one of her family homes was located. Leaning back, Alayne let out another slow breath. Relief softened her shoulders and eased the tightness in her chest. After a full year's tour with her SG-14 team in the Pegasus Galaxy, she was finally home. As the taxi left the airport grounds, Alayne reached into her jeans pocket and pulled out her phone. She unlocked the screen with her thumb, scrolled through her recent calls, and tapped her father's name. When he picked up from Washington, D.C., Alayne told him she had landed safely at Heathrow and reminded him not to mention her arrival to her mother or her brother. "It's a surprise, Dad," she said with a smile, resting one hand on top of her carry-on. "Anyway, I'll give Mom and John your love." She puckered her lips and made a playful smooch into the phone, earning a quiet chuckle from the driver. "See you and Auntie Carla in 3 days." Then she ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. She wondered how her mother and brother would react. A full year had passed since she had last seen them or any of her family. Her thoughts drifted to her mother as she watched cars rushing past on the opposite side of the road through the rear passenger window. Becca Collins served on the board of one of the top 5 financial firms in the city, while her older brother, Jonathan, worked as a senior solicitor with the Crown Prosecution Service. In their entire extended family, only Alayne, her cousin Robbie, and her father, the British military attaché assigned to Homeworld Command, served in the military. And then there was Aunt Carla, who, at least in her grandparents' eyes, was the family's black sheep, an aspiring musician who had finally begun gaining recognition after performing multiple gigs across London and the rest of the UK. She was now touring in the United States after having been discovered on one of the major talent competitions back home. And her cousin Robbie was a full-bird colonel commanding the Tauri Defense Force's newest BCS 304 ship, the Aurora. A few minutes before the taxi reached London proper, Alayne noticed several jets streaking across the sky at high speed. F-502s? Why have Sparrows been deployed? She narrowed her eyes as 12 of the jets climbed sharply toward the dark thunderclouds hanging over the city and fired plasma blasts upward. Then streaks of red and black tore through the clouds toward London, ripping straight through one of the Sparrows. Alayne's eyes widened as a deafening boom rolled across the landscape, shaking the ground beneath them. A second explosion followed, another violent boom, followed by even more. A chill shot through her spine. "Fuck no!" the driver shouted, slamming the brakes. The taxi skidded sideways as cars ahead stopped abruptly. Alayne braced her arm across the door handle while the vehicle came to a rough halt. Like so many others, she flung open the door and stepped out into the roadway. Multiple fireballs blossomed over London in the distance, their orange glow reflected in the terrified faces around her. She lifted her gaze as more Sparrows arrived, each one firing relentlessly at the incoming black and red streaks cutting through the clouds. Alayne still remembered every second of that day. She knew she would never forget it. It was the day the group, later identifying themselves as the Brotherhood, launched a coordinated attack on Earth. Major cities were targeted. London, her home, was among the worst hit. A vast section of the capital was reduced to burning wreckage. Hundreds of thousands were killed or injured in London alone, with even more casualties across the world. Hands trembling, Elaine clamped them over her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. The Shard, where Becca worked, was one of the buildings completely destroyed. She pulled out her phone, desperately calling her mother. Maybe she stayed home today. Maybe she's sick. Oh God, please be sick. But every attempt ended with the same cold, automated voice informing her that the call could not be connected. She tried calling her brother next, tears streaming down her cheeks, only to hear the same emotionless message. It would later be confirmed that Becca Collins and Jonathan Collins were among the casualties. While Earth counted its dead, simultaneous assaults struck Chulak and several other allied worlds. The mysterious Brotherhood wielded technology no one had ever seen before. Earth and her allies were at war now, a war that had not ended since. The twins, now. Alayne shook her head in disbelief before she tore her eyes away from the woman who looked so much like her mother, the music continuing to drift down from the gallery above. It can't be possible, she thought. How could this woman look so much like Mom? Alayne felt as if her lungs had tightened. Breathing became difficult, each inhale sharp and strained. She needed to leave. She stepped back and turned toward the exit. I have to get out. She took several more steps, her hood still lowered enough that no one noticed her among the crowd, celebrating the wedding. I need to get out. I need air. When she reached the doors, she stopped short. A thick wooden beam had been lodged across the handles, barring any exit. She moved to lift the beam and slip out of the great hall, her stride toward the door quickening, her thoughts scattered and frantic, only to halt again when the music changed. The shift was abrupt, jarring, as though the entire room inhaled at once. A cold shiver rippled along her spine as she slowly turned her gaze back toward the musicians in the gallery. The new song was haunting, its melody soft but unsettling, a tune that seemed to coil around her throat and fill her with a vague and nameless dread. Shaking her head, she began moving toward the door again, determined to use the party's distraction to slip away unnoticed. But just before she reached it, an old man seated at the center of the high table at the far end of the room suddenly cried out, "Your Grace!" Alayne froze mid-stride once again. She turned her head toward the old man as the celebration abruptly quieted, people taking their seats in an uneasy hush. Just as she had sensed danger in the haunting melody moments earlier, she sensed the same warning in the man's voice, something sharp enough to raise goosebumps along her arms. She stepped away from the door and moved toward a shadowed corner of the hall for a clearer view. "I feel I've been remiss," the old man continued, his voice rising above the silence as Alayne stared at him. There was anger in that tone, cold, controlled and familiar. It reminded her of that tense moment on P7V-273 when her team and SG-21 had nearly lost the Trinium Treaty. The chieftain's voice then, thick with greed and veiled hostility, echoed now in the decrepit old man at the high table as he slowly stood and raised his glass. Once again, Alayne's blood ran cold when the man he had addressed as "Your Grace" also stood. He lifted his mug of wine toward those beside him and then toward the old man before stepping into the aisle between the long tables. When Alayne caught sight of the young red-haired man's face, her heart lurched painfully in her chest. How is this possible? She thought, stunned. How is there someone who looks like Mom and John living on another world? She stared at the young man's dark red hair, then at the worried woman who had been watching her earlier. That woman was now tugging on the sleeve of a man with thinning gray hair, while the decrepit old man continued his rambling speech about honor and oaths. A dangerous tension began to thicken in the air, subtle but unmistakable. To Alayne, it felt exactly like P7V-273. Her instincts screamed at her. I hope not, she thought. She didn't want to get involved. This wasn't her fight. And even if she did want to intervene, she was alone on this world, with no backup and with technology no one else possessed. I should leave, she told herself while watching the woman, her mother's double, grow more frantic as she pushed up the gray-haired man's sleeve. But another thought tugged at her. I need to know how a copy of my brother and mother can exist on another world. Maybe I should. Alayne took a few steps to the right, moving away from the corner to see what had alarmed Becca's doppelganger. Suddenly, the woman's gaze snapped to Alayne, and her voice rang through the great hall, sharp and terrified. "Sansa!" At her shout, the muted sounds of celebration died instantly. A confused Alayne pulled back her hood, revealing her face. The young man, the one who looked so much like her brother, turned at once, his eyes narrowing as he stared at her in shock. "Sansa?" he said, disbelief tightening his expression. Alayne felt the weight of every gaze in the hall shift toward her, even the decrepit old man's, whose speech faltered mid-sentence. Then the man with the thinning hair turned to stare at her as well. His pale eyes were so cold and lifeless that she felt as though she was staring into something hollow and soulless. Alayne opened her mouth to say she wasn't who they thought she was, her mind racing. "Who's Sansa? Do I have a double here too? What's going on?" "Robb!" Becca's doppelganger suddenly screamed. She slapped the grey-haired man hard enough to send him stumbling into another table, startled faces whipping toward her. She pointed toward the high table and shouted, "It's a trap!" And in the next breath, all hell broke loose. Roose Bolton POV. Roose Bolton was surprised at the slap from Catelyn Stark. He had believed she wasn't northern enough, not hard enough for the people of the north. Not only was the slap unexpected, but the force that sent him stumbling back into the table behind him shocked him even more. He pushed himself off the edge of the table and turned toward the supposed Sansa, just as Catelyn spun to Robb and yelled about a trap. All the while, Roose rushed at the supposed Sansa with a gleam in his eyes. "Sansa Stark, how did you escape King's Landing?" he demanded as he shoved the startled girl, who cried out over his shoulders, "Look out!" back against the wall. The older Bolton had heard the rumors that Sansa was more of a southern girl, a child who believed in the knights from songs and stories. She believed in hope and honor and did not yet understand the real world. Bolton had once wanted to wed his heir, Domeric, to her years ago, but Domeric had mysteriously died. As arrows rained down from the gallery above, and he kept the supposed Sansa pinned against a wall, Bolton heard screams of his Queen of the North, Talisa Stark. He saw the supposed Sansa's brown eyes widen at the slaughter unfolding over his shoulder, the massacre of Robb's army. But something was wrong, something he had missed until this very moment. "Brown," Bolton whispered, staring into the supposed Sansa's eyes. He had heard that Eddard Stark's Sansa had blue eyes, Tully blue, and was about 14 years old, but the girl, no. The woman he had pinned against the wall did not have blue eyes, and she looked older, and those brown eyes, they weren't looking at him anymore. They were staring over his shoulder in horror. Then abruptly they flicked back to him, and time seemed to slow. His heart seemed to drag in his chest. When those eyes fixed on him, the Lord of the Dreadfort saw something he had not expected. Rage. The eyes of someone who had seen war, someone who had killed. His own eyes narrowed in confusion. Right before rough hands grabbed his shoulders and tore him away, he crashed into the edge of a nearby table. Snarling, he twisted, already reaching for his dagger. Whoever had dragged him away would die first. Then he would return to the supposed Sansa. He would take her back to the Dreadfort and interrogate her. After all, after that very night, the Lord of the Dreadfort would be the Warden of the North. He thought with silent pride, after thousands of years, the Red Kings will rule the North again. He convinced himself that the brown eyes of this Sansa Stark had been a trick of the torchlight, that she had truly escaped King's Landing and somehow fled to the twins after hearing of the wedding. "I win," he told himself. "I will have Sansa Stark marry my bastard, Ramsay, and then the North will truly be mine." Alayne POV. Alayne watched the thin-haired, pale-eyed man rush at her. She stood frozen. For a moment, she forgot all her training as those who looked like her brother and mother were attacked right in front of her. All hell had broken loose. The air felt thick, as though the tension itself was holding her in place. Then the thin-haired man with the cold eyes grabbed her arms and shoved her back against the wall. She stared into his pale eyes and shivered. Over his right shoulder, she glimpsed the shock on the faces of numerous men and women before they were cut down by axes and swords. Then she caught movement at her 2 o'clock. "Look out!" she shouted. But it was too late. Elaine's eyes flew open in horror as a dagger was driven into the abdomen of the pregnant woman, the one who had been sitting beside the doppelganger of her brother. The woman was stabbed at least 4 times, screaming in agony as blood spattered onto the floor each time the blade was ripped from her bleeding belly. Time seemed to stop when Elaine's peripheral vision caught sight of her brother's double staggering back as an arrow tore through his right shoulder. She wanted to scream. Her mind buzzed, screaming at her to remember her training. She had seen war, she had killed, she had been injured, she had watched people die. Something deep inside her was yelling at her to get it together. "Mom, John." The thought cut through the fog just as time snapped back into motion. She heard the sickening whistle of arrows slicing through the air, followed by the wet impact as they struck bodies. She heard steel biting into flesh, yelps and screams erupting from the tables as people fought desperately to survive. Elaine's focus snapped back to the man pinning her against the wall. Rage burned in her eyes. She didn't know these people, these duplicates of the family she had lost, but they were not going to die. She prepared to strike, only to see the duplicate of her mother rush up behind the pale-eyed man, grabbing his shoulders and yanking him backward. Anger flashed across his face as he was dragged away, and at the same time, his hand darted to his side, closing around the handle. Alayne surged forward. She slipped past her mother's doppelganger and seized the man's left wrist just as he pulled out a razor-sharp dagger, free. Locking eyes with him, she twisted his hand until the blade clattered onto the grey stone floor. She stepped in and drove a strike into his exposed throat. He gasped, and she struck again, harder. Her elbow slammed into the side of his face. Finally, she shoved him away and finished with a back kick that crushed into his chest, sending him crashing onto a table. He groaned, clutching at his ribs. Alayne spun back and grabbed her mother's doppelganger by the wrist, hauling her close just as arrows from above whistled past and slammed into the table to their right. A heartbeat later, she realized those balls would have struck the woman. "Get down," Alayne barked. She shoved Becca's doppelganger beneath the table before her eyes flicked upward to the high table. There the old man sat with a mug of wine clutched in his shriveled hand, his face lit with perverse joy as he watched the slaughter unfold. Alayne ducked under the table beside the doppelganger as screams and the clash of metal raged around them. Becca's duplicate whispered, "Sansa, Alayne looked up at the stranger who wore her mother's face and shook her head. Reaching beneath her cloak, she drew her plasma weapon from its holster. "I don't know, Sansa," she yelled over the chaos, her voice tight. But she cut herself off. The confusion on the doppelganger's face made her chest tighten. But survival came first. Alayne was acutely aware of the threat above them. The people in the gallery had to be neutralized. "They have the high ground," she thought, "and while I don't have a crossbow, I have the next best thing, a plasma weapon." "Stay here," Alayne ordered, locking eyes with the woman's familiar blue gaze. "It's safe. The arrows can't reach you." She turned and, staying low, slid beneath the length of the table toward the far end. From there, she spotted the duplicate of her brother crawling toward the bleeding woman just as one of 3 crossbow bolts slammed into him. Alayne flinched at the impact. From beneath the table, she watched attackers stab the unarmed. Then she glanced back at her mother's double, who was whispering to herself, her gaze fixed on the old, decrepit man presiding over the carnage from the high table. "Traitor, oathbreaker," she muttered angrily beneath the table they were taking shelter under before turning toward Alayne. Alayne looked away from her and down at the plasma weapon, setting it to kill. The musicians in the gallery were armed with crossbows, surrounded by a wooden, fence-like structure, probably to prevent any arrows from getting through, she thought. But I don't have arrows, just the next best thing. "Stay here," Alayne ordered quietly, but firmly to her mother's duplicate. She slipped out from beneath the table and glanced briefly at the duplicate of her brother, who was begging the stabbed woman to wake up, then rolled onto her back and aimed her weapon at the gallery. She switched the firing rate to full automatic and squeezed the trigger. Thoom! The sound heralded multiple bolts of plasma firing in rapid succession. Each superheated blast, contained within a magnetic shell, tore through the wooden gallery. Armor shattered. Flesh burned. The attackers screamed as the plasma cut through them, killing them before anyone had the chance to loose an arrow at Alayne. Moments later, silence fell. Alayne rolled onto her side and trained her weapon on those still standing in the hall. Faces stared back at her, stunned and pale. She rose slowly to her feet and switched the weapon to stun. An indicator on the casing shifted to blue while another flashed, showing the Naquadah core recharging after expending most of its stored energy. Her gaze drifted to her brother's doppelganger, who was staring at her in disbelief as his hands pressed desperately against the woman's bleeding abdomen. "Sansa?" he whispered, shaking his head before looking back down at the woman's lifeless body. Blood pooled beneath her as her glassy eyes stared at the ceiling. Tears streaked down his cheeks as he pressed harder, as if refusing to accept what had already happened. Alayne wanted to tell him the truth, that the woman was dead, but stopped herself. Instead, she looked away and became aware of the stares burning into her. "Now," Alayne began, moving cautiously toward the red-haired teen. He lifted his hands from the pregnant woman's wound, revealing 2 crossbow bolts embedded in his upper left torso. To Alayne, it was a miracle his heart hadn't been hit. She turned to face the gathered crowd. "Let's take it easy," she said evenly. "This is a wedding, so what are all of you cunts waiting for?" The decrepit old man shrieked from behind her as he struggled to his feet and pointed at them. "Kill them all." Alayne tightened her grip on the weapon and swung it back toward the crowd. She checked her left, then her right. Her mother's doppelganger emerged from beneath the table, staring up at the destroyed gallery before looking back at Alayne in stunned silence. Alayne's gaze flicked to the unconscious man she had coldly back-kicked earlier. "I said kill them all," the old man screeched again. Fighting erupted at the back of the hall. 6 people rushed forward, 4 toward Alayne and her brother's duplicate, and 2 toward her mother's duplicate. Other men, likely allies of Not, Becca, and John, tried to intervene, but they were too slow. The attackers already had their swords drawn. "Damn it," Alayne muttered. She fired twice. A blue bolt struck a bearded man square in the chest. Another hit a blood-smeared man in the head. The Zat-like energy rendered them unconscious instantly, and they collapsed to the floor. 2 more shots dropped the men lunging for her brother's duplicate, followed by another pair that struck the attackers charging her mother's duplicate. The fighting halted again. All eyes turned to Alayne. Witchcraft. Magic. Blood magic. The whispers rippled through the room as Alayne focused on her brother's doppelganger. She remembered her mother's duplicate calling him Robb. "As I was about to say," Alayne continued, glancing between Robb and her mother's lookalike, reminding herself to learn the woman's name later. "My idea of a wedding usually involves no killing on such a happy day." She let a hint of sarcasm creep into her voice to mask the tension. "Where I come from, we had the right of hospitality. Guests were meant to be unharmed." Her gaze turned to Robb, who had dragged himself upright and now leaned against the table, grimacing as pain shot through him. She turned back to Becca's duplicate, the woman who had called her Sansa earlier. "I'm guessing there's something similar here." "Yes," the woman breathed, eyes locked on Alayne. "What are you all doing?" the old man shrilled again. "Stupid sons of mine, kill—" "Silence, traitor," a gruff voice roared from the crowd. More shouts followed as fighting erupted once again, this time from the unarmed guests, who struck back with desperate fury. Alayne froze, unsure who was friend or foe anymore. 2 more men broke away and charged Becca's duplicate. Alayne didn't hesitate. She fired, dropping them, then spun and shot 2 more attackers who were nearly on Robb as he reached for a dinner knife with his good arm. She shifted position as someone rushed past her, then fired again, the electrical charges sending 2 more men crumbling to the floor. She turned just in time to see her mother's lookalike sprint around the high table and yank a long-bladed knife from a massive block of cheese. 2 young girls, barely in their teens, fled screaming as the old man stared in terror. "Traitorous filth," the woman snarled as she grappled with him briefly before slashing his throat. His head struck the table with a dull thud. Silence fell. Then a woman's anguished cry rang out. "Mother!" Alayne turned and saw a woman in a blood-stained green dress collapse beside a body, dropping the dagger she had been clutching. At the same time, a rush of movement drew Alayne's attention back to Robb as her mother's look-alike hurried to him. He exchanged a nod with Becca's twin as they whispered urgently. Alayne tore her gaze away as the woman rushed to the sobbing daughter in the bloodied green dress kneeling beside the bloodied corpse. Who did we lose? Robb asked hoarsely, arrows tearing pain through him as he tried to turn. Lord Umber, who did we lose? Many, including Mage, a large, stout, bearded man, answered grimly, blood dripping from his fists. He shut his eyes briefly before adding, we're still counting the dead. Fuck! Robb shouted. How many people did we lose? How many did that fucker help kill? His eyes widened before his strength gave out, and he slumped forward. Alayne rushed to him as her mother's look-alike cried out, Robb! You look so much like Jon. Why? Alayne thought as she caught him, carefully avoiding the arrow shafts embedded in his body. They locked eyes. Robb squinted at her, breath ragged before murmuring, You're not Sansa. Sorry, I'm just someone who I guess must look like her, Alayne muttered as she stumbled backward, struggling to keep him upright as his weight pressed into her. Several men from the crowd rushed forward at once. Get her away from the king. She's a witch. Hold her for... Alayne turned her head toward the group advancing on her just as she heard Robb's voice. He was gripping her arms tightly, his voice ragged as he forced the words out. Hold. As your king, I'm ordering you to hold. Alayne looked back at Robb, then at the men who froze mid-step. Some stood uncertainly, unsure of what to do next, while others glared at her, hands slick with blood as they clutched daggers, cleavers, and even what looked like butter knives. Your Grace, she... Just hold, Robb rasped. He shifted slightly, leaning more of his weight onto her as she pushed up with her legs to keep him from collapsing entirely. We have to leave. Robb, not Becca, cried out. The woman rushed to him, tears streaking down her face as she grabbed his arm. Robb, we'll leave. We'll get Edmure and leave. We'll take Sansa. She turned to Alayne, eyes shining with desperate hope. Then back to Robb. We will... I can't feel Grey Wind anymore, Robb whispered. Alayne frowned, unsure what the words meant, as the woman, who looked so much like her mother, gasped sharply. What? I think he's dead, Robb continued, his voice breaking. I can always feel him, even when he's hunting, but I can't feel him now. We have to leave. We have to leave right now. The woman's eyes widened in horror as Alayne watched the anguish ripple through Robb's face. Lady Stark? Alayne lifted her head as the man Robb had called Lord Umber spoke. She then glanced back at the woman now identified as Lady Stark. Umber continued, If the direwolf is dead, then there is fighting ongoing outside these walls. Lady Stark finished quietly. Her shoulders sagged as she took a step back. They betrayed us. The Freys, the Boltons. They betrayed us. Then all we have to do is collect Lord Edmure and then kill his Frey wench and... No, Robb breathed. She's a Tully now. She's kin. We'll fight our way out of here, declared the woman in the bloody green dress as she strode forward, fury carved into her features. Daisy, Robb called weakly, supported by both Alayne and Lady Stark. We need a plan. How many people do you have? Alayne asked. She cringed internally when every head turned toward her, suspicion sharp in their eyes, but she kept her expression steady. How many? Sansa, you... She's not Sansa, Robb cut in, wincing as he leaned back against the table again. He looked up at his mother, surprise flickering across her face. Look at her eyes, mother. They're brown, not blue. She looks like Sansa, but no. I'd like to explain everything, Alayne interjected gently as Lady Stark turned back toward her. She looks traumatized, Alayne noted, and I doubt what happened here is what made her so afraid for this Sansa person. But if there's fighting outside and we're the only ones alive in here, then we don't have time for explanations. Use your magic, Daisy demanded. Swear fealty to the King of the North, and use your witchcraft or magic or whatever it is for the North. Sorry, Alayne replied, shaking her head. I can't swear fealty to any other king. Before you ask why, I have my own reasons. And besides, what I did wasn't magic. Sansa, Lady Stark whispered, horror trembling in her voice. We saw you perform feats of magic. Not magic, Alayne insisted, meeting her gaze before turning to Robb. If you're their leader, then my advice is that we get the hell out of here. What I did with my weapon isn't magic, and it isn't enough to hold off. She turned to Lord Umber. How many people are there? Nearly 5,500 Stark, Bolton and Tully men, and 3,500 Freys or more, he answered, shaking his head as confusion crossed his face. He growled suddenly, glaring at her. You bewitched me. No, I didn't, Alayne snapped, then turned back to Lady Stark as the woman spoke of Bolton betrayal. Even with her plasma weapon, she could only take down so many targets before sheer numbers overwhelmed them. Their only hope was to use the fighting outside as cover to escape, then reach her Sparrow for air cover, and for that she needed a horse. I saw some horses by the stables I passed, Alayne thought, but I have little experience riding. It wasn't my cup of tea. She frowned to herself, looking away as the others scrambled to form a plan. She already knew most of them wouldn't survive, especially if what she had witnessed in the Great Hall was any indication. Robb and Lady Stark's allies could very well be very drunk. She recalled, thinking of the unarmed guests, feasting when she'd crept through the castle earlier. It'll be a slaughter out there. Some might survive, but not many. Her gaze drifted back to Robb and Lady Stark as they spoke in low voices. They look so much like Mom and John. It's uncanny. I just wanted to crash a wedding, see what a real medieval one was like. But now I can't let them die. Not again. Not again. Look, I'm not from around here, Alayne said, glancing at the pain flickering across Lady Stark's face. I'm not this Sansa person. I'm from somewhere very far away. She shrugged lightly. I'm an explorer, and I'd love to explain more, but I think the first thing we do is get the hell out of here. Agreed? We must get to Edmure and his wife first, Lady Stark replied, forcing herself to look away from Alayne, and then we go north. Moat Cailin would have been taken by the Ironborn, another man argued. Around them, bodies were dragged away, enemies dispatched without ceremony. Lord Umber snarled, and the journey to River Run would be crawling with Lannisters and their bitches. We go north, Robb declared. We take the King's Road. Nearly all the Freys are here. We take the King's Road to the Neck and seek out the Cranachman. He looked at Daisy, then Lord Umber. Lord Reed is a friend and ally of my father, a loyal bannerman of the Starks. They know the land around Moat Cailin. They'll help repel the Ironborn. I'll send ravens to Lord Manderley and seek aid to attack the moat from the northern side. Robb, Lady Stark murmured, cupping his cheeks and turning his face toward her. I lost the north, Mother, Robb admitted. Shame rippled through the survivors as they looked away. He straightened despite the pain, their arrowheads still protruding from his upper left torso. But I'll get it back. I'll reclaim our homes, I'll drive out the Ironborn, and when I get my hands on Theon, I'll kill him. He turned to Alayne. I don't know why you look like my sister. I don't know why you look like my brother, Alayne replied with a crooked smirk. Robb tilted his head, startled. How long would it take to reach Moat Cailin, or the Neck you mentioned? So I look like his sister, Alayne thought. Your Grace, someone shouted before Robb could answer. Alayne looked over Robb's shoulder to see a dark-haired man in a bloodied vest and trousers, sword leveled at the balding man she'd knocked unconscious earlier, the one who had pinned her to the wall with the unsettling eyes. What do we do with this traitor? The man demanded. I say kill him, one of the survivors snarled as Daisy charged past them, sword raised. Because of that fuck, my mother died, she spat. They broke Guessright, he helped the Freys. The Boltons helped the Freys, and none of them, especially this bastard, deserved to live. Robb twisted around sharply. Daisy, stop! His voice echoed through the stone hall. The blade halted an inch from the man's skull. Daisy stared at Robb, eyes bloodshot, her arm trembling as she struggled to hold back. We'll need him, Robb said firmly. If there's fighting outside these walls, he may be the best way for us to leave unmolested. You mean to take him hostage? Lady Stark clarified. Yes, A sharp rapping sound echoed against the doors. Everyone turned as one. Open the doors, a voice shouted as sharp fists slammed against the wood. Lame Lothar, open up. Alayne pointed toward the door. Is that the only way in and out? Yes. Alayne turned her head toward Robb as he answered, his eyes shifting toward her. As if anticipating her next question, he added, There's a stairway behind the door to the left. It leads up to the gallery. Alayne nodded before glancing over her shoulder at the shattered fencing around the edges of the gallery. She then looked back at Robb. We need to get out of here. The moment the words left her mouth, more pounding echoed against the wooden double doors. Thanks to the thick wooden plank braced across the handles, the door wasn't opening from the outside. She stepped back as the others began arguing over their options. Alayne knew that the longer they stayed, the more time the enemy had to finish whatever they were doing, and then return to this great hall. We could be outnumbered now, she thought grimly. We lost time. Her gaze dropped to the plasma weapon at her side. I could overload the power cell. The explosion would clear the hallway. Anyone nearby on adjacent hallways and floors could scatter from the noise. Her jaw tightened. But then I'll be left with nothing except my combat knife. Lord Walder! Voices rang out from the other side of the door. The pounding intensified, the wood groaning beneath the weight of bodies pressing against it. Alayne removed her plasma weapon and glanced at the indicator. Fully charged. The blast would be substantial. She lifted her head as more voices echoed down the corridor beyond the doors. For the north! For Winterfell! For the king in the north! The group froze, listening as steel clashed against steel. The fighting raged on, boots thudding, blades ringing, men shouting. Then, silence. Heavy pounding followed. Hey, get her out of here! Alayne glanced toward Lady Stark, just as the older woman let out a breath of relief. She clearly recognized the voice. Then another voice broke through the noise. No, I'm supposed to be here. Mother! Mother! Arya! Lady Stark cried. Several of the men rushed for the doors. Alayne met Robb's eyes. He gave a single nod. Alayne returned her weapon to its holster, but kept her hand tight on the grip, ready. Several men lifted the wooden plank and tossed it aside. The door swung open, and a short-haired boy rushed in with a cluster of bloodied men. Arya! Lady Stark surged forward and grabbed the child. No, Alayne corrected silently. That's a girl. While this is a touching reunion, a man in armor drawled sarcastically, half his face burned and twisted. There's still a shitload of fighting out there. Cat! Another man with grey hair pushed toward Lady Stark. Cat, Alayne thought, glancing at the woman named Daisy as she hauled the unconscious man Alayne had struck earlier to a corner. She then shifted her gaze to Cat, Lady Stark, and thought, strange name, probably short for something. That bastard's right, the grey-haired man muttered. There's a load of fighting outside. He nearly ran, the burned man added, jerking his chin toward the grey-haired one before scanning the room. His gaze landed on Alayne, narrowing with suspicion. After a moment, he shook his head and turned back to Lady Stark. Arya slipped from her mother's grasp and sprinted toward Robb. Alayne listened as the grey-haired man explained how he'd been relieving himself when everything collapsed into chaos. Unarmed, he'd nearly been taken until he encountered the Hound. Alayne looked up as the burned man glanced back at her. So, he's called the Hound, she thought. He'd been cutting down Freys while protecting Arya, the grey-haired man continued. That was when he joined the fight, picking up a fallen sword. We've got 100 wounded men, he finished, still strong enough to fight. Robb! Arya shouted as she reached her brother. The old man announced that 20 men had been sent to retrieve Edmure and his wife. Elaine's eyes dropped to Arya's sword, a thin blade clutched in her left hand. The girl couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years old. Sansa? Arya squinted at Alayne, eyes narrowing. What the hell are you wearing? How did you... Language, Arya, Robb warned. Sorry, Arya scowled, then looked Alayne over again. How the hell did you get out of King's Landing? Did your precious Joffrey... Alayne flinched at the venom in the girl's voice. What happened between her and her sister? She's so angry. She exhaled slowly and shook her head. I'm not Sansa. What are you... Arya was about to continue before Alayne cut her off. Robb, Lady Stark. Alayne stepped forward, moving past Arya, who tracked her every step. We need to leave, now. Little bird, the Hound rumbled. His voice drew her gaze upward. How did you... Questions later, Alayne cut in, shaking her head. She turned to Robb, then Lady Stark. We go now. Whoever she is, the grey-haired man muttered, staring at Alayne before addressing Lady Stark. The fighting outside is still heavy. We're badly outnumbered. We could use the distraction to escape the twins and make for River Run. I cannot, Lady Stark replied firmly. The old man stared at her in disbelief. Uncle, she continued, Robb is Lord of Winterfell. Until he is married again, I remain Lady of Winterfell. My place is in the north. Alayne caught the sorrow in Lady Stark's eyes as she looked at Robb. He turned away, staring at the dead woman on the floor. Several heads around the room nodded in agreement. The Ironborn may have taken Moat Cailin, the old man in black armor countered. We'll ask Lord Reed of the Crannogmen for aid, Robb replied, gripping the shaft of one of the arrows lodged in his body. Stop! Alayne caught his hand. A hush fell. A hand landed on her shoulder. She turned to the older man and noted the black jumping fish on his breastplate before meeting his blue eyes. Listen carefully, Alayne said evenly. Unless you're a healer, do not let him remove these arrows. She turned back to Robb. Pulling them out now will tear muscle and flesh. Your blood has clotted. Remove them without treatment and you'll bleed out. Uncle, Robb murmured, amusement flickering in his eyes as he glanced at Alayne. When we reach Greywater, I'll ask Lord Reed for one of his maesters. Who is this woman that you trust her word so readily? The man asked. That's Sansa, Arya answered flatly. Alayne rubbed her forehead. But how she knows about wounds, Arya continued, I don't know. She's supposed to care about knights and songs and princes and... Arya, Robb snapped. You never introduced yourself, he added, turning back to Alayne. Let's survive first, she replied. If I die on the road, Robb said quietly, I want the name of the one who helped save us. If you want my name, Alayne countered, meeting his gaze, then don't die. She turned to the man with the fish sigil. We use the chaos as cover, yes? He studied her warily. I'll take that as agreement, Alayne said, shifting her focus back to Robb's injuries. Let's move. To be continued.